Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the University of Washington School of Medicine Advice for Reapplicants, where we will review the application today. I'm Leanna Muskie. I'm a family physician, and I'm a member of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. I live in Polson, Montana, where I work part-time for the Tribal Health Department here as a family doc, and I'm also the Associate Dean for Admissions for the University of Washington School of Medicine. I have with me today my esteemed colleagues, the admissions team for UW School of Medicine, who I will ask to go ahead and introduce themselves now. Sonia, let's start with you.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming today. I'm Sonia Lane, and like Leanna said, I work in the Office of Admissions. Big part of what I do is managing the interviews, all the interviews that we do.
Stella.
Hi folks, my name is Stella Yee. I'm the Director of Admissions. I use she, her pronouns. I oversee the administrative aspects of the office.
Thanks, Stella. Jordan?
Hi, I'm Jordan Richardson, she, her, and I am the analyst here with the admissions team.
Thank you. Sarah?
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Hafner. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the administrative manager here in admissions.
And Rebelle.
Hello everybody, I'm Rebelle. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the program coordinator at admissions.
Thank you. So this is the team who you will work with as you move forward in hopefully your reapplication. And if you have any questions, we are the group who will be able to answer those for you, hopefully. So I just do want to pause for just a minute and say that this presentation is really geared for someone who has applied to medical school before, who may not have been successful in this season or previous seasons. And so we're really gearing towards how to improve and hopefully move further and be successful in the process. So if that's not you at this point, please don't be disappointed in that we may not have the answers to your specific questions, but we really are trying to gear this toward that group of applicants. We do that in lieu of being able to provide one-on-one feedback, which we have done historically. But as you all are aware, we've had quite a year. I think just we as a community of people of the world in terms of the pandemic and the things that came with that, how we all are probably operating in our lives just a little bit differently. That includes those of us in admissions. We had just to really rethink how we approach the season. And one of the decisions that we had to make was that we were just not at the capacity that we needed to be to provide individualized feedback. But what we do hope is that the information that we share with you today and hopefully some of the skills that you'll learn as you leave us today will help you actually self-reflect and improve your application and your ability to improve your application. Despite not having individualized feedback. So I just wanted to make that clear. Before we go any further, it's important for us at the University of Washington to recognize and acknowledge the land that we occupy at the UW itself as the traditional home of the Tulalip, Muckleshoot, Duwamish, and Suquamish tribal nations. Without them, we would not have access to this working, teaching, and learning environment. We humbly take the opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land who are still here. If you're interested in learning more, you could access the website at the bottom of this slide, therealrentduwamish.org. So, what can you expect from today? Well, what you can expect is hopefully we'll share with you some information, some tips, some things to think about in terms of how to improve in a future cycle for admission to medical school. As you know, you registered and we asked you to submit questions ahead of time. So we've tried to build today's presentation around the questions that you submitted, along with some information that we routinely share with applicants who are disappointed in our feedback sessions. So first, we'll review the goals. We always like to remind people that we are a public institution, our admissions process is driven by our mission and our goals and values. So I will share that with you again today. We also utilize holistic review of applications. So we want to be sure that you understand what that means and how we apply that here at the UW School of Medicine. And then we're going to get into sort of the meat of things and share with you what we've discovered to be some of the common areas of challenge and common pitfalls for applicants who are not successful in their first or other tries. So those include things like metrics, motivation, understanding of medicine, and reflection and articulation within the application itself. The goals of today's session are really to share those common pitfalls, like I said, to share strategies of how to review your preparedness to enter medical school and become a doctor. I will let you in on sort of some insight in that our admissions committee is really trying to determine your preparedness. So keep that kind of word in the forefront of your mind as you're hearing the information that we share today, because it's not about so much checking off a checklist of things that you've heard are important to apply to medical school. We're really digging a little bit deeper than that to ensure that you're prepared for the rigors of medical school, for the challenges, for the transformation that happens when you go to medical school, and then as well as into the workforce as a physician. We also, the other goal of this session is to provide suggestions for how you might improve your own application. Once we outline the goals, we also like to have some objectives. So what will you walk away with? We hope that at the end of this session, you have a better understanding of the mission of the School of Medicine. And we really challenge you to try to understand whether that aligns with your own personal mission. Why are you interested in medicine, and is the UW School of Medicine the right place for you? We hope you better understand what holistic review is and how we approach that here at UW. We want you to observe components of successful applications versus perhaps some unsuccessful applications. We hope you understand the common areas where unsuccessful applicants tend to fall short. And probably most importantly, we hope you gain skill to review your own application through the lens of UW School of Medicine admissions. And I do want to pause right there for a minute and just put out a bit of a reminder and perhaps a disclaimer that today's session also is very specific to our admissions process. While we also hope that information that we share will help you be successful wherever you might apply to medical school, the information that we're going to share really is rooted in our own process and how we view applicants, the things that we're looking for, and how those align with our mission. So please keep that in mind as we share our insights. So really quickly, I am not going to read this slide to you. This information and all of the information that we will share with you today, for the most part, with the exception of perhaps the nuance and some of our own insights, are available on our website, which you can see at the top of each and every one of the slides that we share with you today. And I would really encourage you to spend some time there if you haven't, because it's a wealth of resource. And all of these things are important as you try to put together a successful application to the School of Medicine. But you should know that our mission, as it's stated here in the first sentence, that we are dedicated to improving the general health and well-being of the public. Within that, we really have multiple areas that we focus on. So obviously meeting the healthcare needs of our region, recognizing the importance of primary care, and particularly our underserved populations. So I'm sure you've heard of that as one of the things that we hold in high regard at the School of Medicine, and that it is definitely one of the missions that we're trying to serve and trying to meet when we're recruiting and reviewing applicants. But the other parts of that mission are that we are also committed to advancing knowledge and assuming leadership in the biomedical sciences and in academic medicine. So we are not only looking for primary care physicians, future primary care physicians, or those interested in serving the underserved populations. We are also looking for innovators and researchers and leaders. So if you feel like those align well with your future goals, then this is probably the place for you. Also, it's just important for you all to recognize that in order to meet that mission, we align some very specific values and relationships, which include a special responsibility to the states of Washington, Wyoming, Alaska, Montana, and Idaho. And if you've reviewed any of our statistics, you'll know that we admit the predominant number of people who we admit to our institution come from those 5 states. We call that the WWAMI region, right? And that is our special relationship there. We're also very committed to building and sustaining a diverse academic community at all levels. And so, and we want to ensure that our institution is open to learners from all segments of society, especially diverse populations within our region. And so that is something that is taken into high consideration when we're reviewing applicants and applications as well. So all of this, again, is available on the website. So what is holistic review? You probably hear that a lot, and if you spend any time on medical school admissions pages, they will often tell you that they use holistic review to evaluate your application. We just want you to be clear that what that means is that when we look at the applicant, we take into consideration multiple parts. The metrics, which are your grades and MCAT scores, attributes that you have that make you the unique person that you are, as well as your own personal experiences, whether that's your lived experiences through the way you grew up, where your background is from, and or your professional experiences or work experience is your educational experiences, all of the things that make you the unique person that you are. So all of those things are taken into consideration. And at UW School of Medicine and most places, you'll find that we learn all those things about the applicant, and then we try to figure out how does that apply to our institutional mission. So that's why we felt it was important for you to understand that mission as well. This is a nice graphic example of how the AAMC, which is hopefully a resource that you've already become familiar with, but really explains the experiences, attributes, and metrics model of when we're evaluating applicants. So the experiences are all listed on the outside, and you can see examples of those. The attributes surround that. The metrics are a smaller portion of that, and in the middle they define, sort of all of those things make up an applicant's definition of excellence. So that's also available at AAMC.org. So here at the School of Medicine, I can say we at UW School of Medicine, we use the holistic evaluation, and I want to call your attention to the fact that the box on the left of your screen is bigger right now than the box on your right, but that does not mean that there's any more importance or favor placed to those items that we, sort of learn from the application. I just want you to know that that's what we're focusing on today. In another session, we will talk about the interview where we will expand on what's in the gray box. But I just want, it sometimes helps to put that into framework of how do we understand, how do we learn about our applicants, and where do we get that information from? And so the holistic review process says, in our application, we're looking for things that are listed here: motivation, interests, life experience, what kind of exposure have you had to medicine and or other clinical experiences? How do you know about medicine? Where does that come from? One of the other things that perhaps I didn't emphasize earlier, but that is a component that's a very important component to us in our holistic review, is the notion of service. So medicine is a very service-oriented profession. It's sort of rooted in service at its outset. So we're really looking for people who have an understanding of what that means and have demonstrated that well. Leadership and research are important aspects, not necessarily required, but certainly enhance. And really, when you think about physicians, when you think about folks who go into medicine, they often are leaders, sort of in perhaps different areas. But once you become a physician, you're often leader of a team, you're leader of your unit, you often are asked to make difficult decisions in a leadership capacity. So we'd like to see that demonstrated. Research is also one of those things where it's more about having experience and exposure to the process of research, as opposed to having, many publications and, sort of on a research path. Although if that's what's important to you, then tell us about it, because it may make you sort of that unique candidate. We of course review your academic ability. We look at the way that other people think about you. So your letters of recommendation are important for us to help have a well-rounded view of you. And then ensuring that you have some familiarity with what's going on in the world, particularly around health disparities and social determinants of health. So now we're going to kind of start shifting into kind of the meat of the presentation. So the application. The group that you see before you, our admissions team, has literally reviewed tens of thousands of applications. Beyond that, the number is very high. So we feel like we have a sense of the components of the application. What we see is sort of folks who are successful, the pitfalls, the struggles that some folks have, and even some of those that are sort of on the fence, and why those are on the fence. So I'll be asking my colleagues to share some of those nuances with us in just a few minutes. When we do provide feedback, one of the standard things we do is we ask applicants what they think their issues are with their application. And the interesting thing is that almost always they're not really seeing what the problem is. The focus is often on the wrong thing. Whether that be their metrics or their experiences, or sort of they think they need to have more leadership or research, which really, again, those things are helpful to have, but it's often not the thing that eliminates an application from consideration. And the big take-home message, if you're writing things down or wanting to hold on to anything, it's not usually just one thing. So we say that in a big, bold banner, because it's really about looking at your application as a whole and trying to figure out, are you telling a good story? Are you telling the story of you that really conveys the message that you want to convey, and the message that we are looking for? So within the application, successful applicants have clearly demonstrated that they're prepared for medical school and to be a physician. So remember, I talked earlier about preparedness, right? So we're looking for people who are prepared. And how have you done that? How demonstrate that to us? Tell us about it in a meaningful and articulate way. Common pitfall areas, as I highlighted at the very beginning, are these we've sort of lumped them into these categories, and we'll talk about them specifically. It's academic ability, motivation for medicine, a realistic understanding of medicine and the role of a physician, and strong reflections of experiences. Here we'll go into a little bit more detail. So starting with metrics, I think my colleagues will probably agree that oftentimes unsuccessful applicants immediately go to their metrics and say they must not have been good enough. This is the problem with my application. And I will just tell you that utilizing a holistic review process, while we do have some minimum requirements in order to be considered, they're relatively moderate in terms of what you need to attain in order to be considered. And unless you just don't meet that cutoff, it's not often the only thing or the main thing that causes an application to be rejected or screened out. So while these are important, please note that at the University of Washington School of Medicine, we really do take into consideration if somebody has a lower GPA or an MCAT that maybe is on the lower end. We look at the rest of the application to try to figure out why. Are there factors that have influenced, have caused barriers or challenges that have made it more difficult for this applicant to achieve a higher GPA or a more competitive MCAT score? What might those be, and have they articulated that to us in any manner? Sometimes we have to sleuth it out, and sometimes we try to figure out, oh, well, they said they were this, so perhaps it meant this, and that's why their GPA is lower. If that's the case, help us understand. Tell us about your journey. So we don't want to spend too much time on the metrics at this juncture, but just know that it's oftentimes not the only thing that's going to cause your application to be screened out unless you fall below our cutoffs. Our website is a resource for all of this information, so please be sure to check there for any information that you're looking for. A couple of updates just so you know. in the application year 2022 cycle, the MCAT will be optional again for first-time test takers. We have taken into very serious consideration the effects of the pandemic over the last 2 years and how that has influenced applicants' ability to take the MCAT and have access to test-taking sites in a safe and manner which allows an applicant to be at their peak performance. So with that, we concluded with our executive committee again, from the mid part of our last season through our next season, we will again make MCAT optional for first-time test takers. You should note that if you've ever taken the MCAT score, your MCAT score will be available within our system and the committee will take it under consideration. So we really feel it's important for the applicant to have the option to have an MCAT score in their application or not. Please note that if your GPA for whatever reason is not strong, or you have a current MCAT score that may be lower than you think is a reflection of your actual performance, you might strongly consider retaking the MCAT if it is safe and accessible to you. Or perhaps this isn't the year for you to apply. Those are decisions that you need to make, but we want to give applicants the option. You can see if you don't have an MCAT, your GPA is the only metric that we have to, sort of consider you on. And I would just note that what the whole purpose of having metric scores is for us to really be able to have some sense that you can handle the academic rigors of medical school, which are real, which medical school comes fast and furious. It's a lot of content, a lot of information, and you have to be able to demonstrate that you have some working knowledge of some of that content coming in and our ability to, sort of consume and process that along the way. And we use the GPA and the MCAT in order to help us feel reassured about that. If you do have an MCAT, your GPA will be used in addition to your MCAT. So sometimes somebody has a stronger GPA that might offset a lower MCAT and vice versa. And we take all of those things into consideration. The science and math GPA is of particular importance when we're thinking about somebody's ability to handle the rigors of medical school. So if yours is, if your overall GPA is really high, but you struggled in some science and math, just know that that's how we look at those grades. Upward trajectory or post-bac success can be very helpful. And again, this is where in the narrative portions of your application, you might tell us a little bit about that. So I'm going to defer to my colleagues to see if anybody has anything to add about metrics. Looks like we're okay. I must have covered it all, or they're just being shy. Okay, so the next topic that we wanted to consider, or want you to consider, is this notion of motivation. So when we say motivation, what are we talking about? We are really interested in figuring out if you know why you want to be a doctor and what was that moment, or what were the instances, what were the experiences that you had? Where does this motivation come from? And the reason we want to know that is because if you haven't explored that very deeply, you may be coming with a very idealistic or simplistic view of what a physician is or does. Your motivation might be leading you down a path that is not the right path for you. So we just want you to be sure that you've explored that and that really does make sense for you in terms of what you want for your future. So the ways that we, sort of learn what your motivation is in the application part of the process is really through the things that you tell us in the written portions of your application, through your personal statement, through your experiences, and in your secondary essays. So here are some suggestions that we have in terms of when we give feedback to folks. These are the things we find ourselves saying repeatedly. In your personal statement, find a structure that works for you to tell your story. Now, please note that you are going to hear me say your story many times throughout today's presentation. And I want you to also, along with preparedness, I hope you understand that that's what we're looking for. We want to know who you are. If I read your application, I want to be able to turn to my colleague, Sonia, and say, you know what, Sonia, I just read this great application. This is so-and-so who is, sort of from here and was motivated by this and has done these things and looks forward to doing this in the future. And I really believe all of the aspects of that. Like, tell us in a narrative that works for you, a structure that works for you, but for you to be able to really help us understand your story. It's important to include supportive examples within your personal statement, but you really want to be careful about the exploitive or sensitive content. There doesn't have to be a grabber moment. You don't have to be super explicit about some sort of traumatic event or whatever. You can tell us about it without it, sort of trying to have a gotcha sort of thing. It's really about how does that influence your story. So those are some of the things that we see repeatedly in folks who maybe aren't as successful, is that we don't know their story by the time we end up finish reading their personal statement. One of the things I share with folks is that if you didn't know yourself, if you had never met you and you read your personal statement, would you be convinced that this person is right for medicine after reading their personal statement? Ask others that question, have them read it and see what they think, are some good suggestions. I'm going to ask Sarah, do you have any other suggestions from your experience reading personal statements that could be helpful?
Well, I have one thing to think about in terms of your personal statement is that it's just one piece of your entire application. And Dr. Muski is going to talk a little bit more about experiences in the secondary essays. But keep in mind, even though you may be submitting your AMCAP application well before you submit your secondary to our institution, when we read that application and our committee reads that application, it is all of a piece. So we're seeing it all together. And when we're thinking about your story, we're trying to see how everything fits together. So I recommend going back and reviewing your personal statement and your experiences when you are writing those secondary essays, and considering how they're all coming together to tell your story. And the way I like to think of it is your application is, it's like the 5-paragraph essay, right, that you used to write back in school, where you had a thesis statement and you had to support your thesis statement with evidence, and you had to explain how that evidence matched back to your thesis, right? So all the pieces of your application, like your experiences, your secondary essays, everything are supporting evidence to why you want to be a physician. And so be thinking about how each piece works as a whole and how you are demonstrating why each piece is a part of that. So that means that your experiences can be lots of different things. They don't have to be medical, but tell us what you've learned from them and how they fit together to make up part of your story.
Yes, absolutely. And just more specifically, your experiences are part of your story, as we've said, and can provide evidence. But also, as you think about what kind of experiences you want to have that will prepare you, like some of them are your organic experiences, right? Like we said, your life experiences, the things that you've done, the things that make you unique. But some of them are experiences that you've sought out specifically in the pursuit of medicine. And I would just say you really want to be intentional about those experiences. This is the part where it's not about, finding something to do that qualifies as volunteer work or service on your application because you've heard that you have to have those things, but really like, what is important to you? What gets you excited? What are you passionate about? And have you, sort of sought experiences to fuel that passion or to feed that part of your soul that, is in the context of service or volunteer work, or perhaps your clinical exposure or something. So do they make sense in your story? If you're somebody who's really passionate about, service to underserved populations, and particularly the homeless population, and particularly on the streets of your particular city, and you have all of this experience that does that, but then you're like, oh, and I also needed to do leadership, so I went over here and I, sort of decided to be the president of some, random club for 2 months just so I could say I was a leader somewhere. Like, those things don't jive. So it's helpful if you're sort of being intentional, because it's about what you want and how you want to prepare yourself to be a good physician. And Sarah said, articulate and reflect on what you learned, not just about what you did. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. In terms of your secondaries, those prompts are really designed for you to demonstrate your preparation, your experience, and your understanding of certain components of medicine and medical school. And so provide, again, those pieces of your story that demonstrate how well prepared you are. I would also ask Jordan, sort of let you know that Jordan reads a lot of our applications in a screening capacity. So I would love to hear if she has anything else to add about motivation.
Yeah, I'd say it's kind of the big thing, right? It's the first thing we get to really know about you, and it's really the big point we're trying to make, right, in why you want to do this, because it's a profession that one does not walk into lightly, right? And so we need to know, like any big decision in your life, that you've kind of thought it through, and that you have all those pieces kind of together so that you feel comfortable moving forward into this, into this next journey. And so I'd partially reiterate for motivation as far as making sure it's coming across is really reiterating that part of like, have others review this. You will read this, dozens of times, and you're going to be like, oh no, it totally makes sense. Have someone who knows nothing about medicine read it. Have, someone who maybe doesn't know that you're applying to medical school read it. Someone who doesn't have the same context that you have, or even people in your family may have about your life, your journey, and see what they get out of it. Don't even maybe tell them that it's, for something specific, and say, what do you get out of this? And see if they hit the points that you want to get across, right? Does it feel like, it's all kind of a trajectory about one thing, don't make it all about your pet or a deep metaphor that maybe doesn't get to the point. Keep it, to the point, and help us get to know you. We talk a lot about your story. Your story needs to be throughout that piece, not only your personal statement, but your experiences and those secondaries, in a way that feels authentic, and isn't dramatized, right? So sometimes we come across where people do those hooks or feel they have to add some kind of pomp and circumstance that's not necessary. We really just want to know that you are ready and that you've thought about this, because that's really the concern behind motivation. For us, kind of like metrics is making sure that you can make it through medical school in the rigors of what we're going to be asking for. The motivation is just knowing that you know what you're getting into, and that the reason you're going into this is for right reasons that are also going to sustain you, because it is a challenging journey through medical school and residency and into that profession, which is also a challenge. So I think those big parts are just really deep diving into yourself to make sure that you've done some reflection, and we'll talk about reflection quite a bit coming forward, because that's really what you need to kind of pull from, and then, like Sarah stated, add in those supporting evidences along the way of how you've continually come back to this decision, because it's not kind of a whim that maybe happened a couple months ago. This needs to be something that's been working on, and even if you're coming to medicine a little later in your journey, there still has to be reasons and how you've supported yourself in saying, yes, this is the right trajectory for me, and that's just what we're asking for.
Great, thank you for that. And I think Jordan gives examples of things like talking too much about your pets or giving a crazy metaphor, because she's read lots of applications and those are probably real, of things that people have submitted that perhaps were not successful. So thanks for that, Jordan. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. So let's just get back to where we need to be. Are you still hearing me? Okay, sorry.
Can I add one thing? Just
absolutely, yes,
slide.
Please do. Yes.
Just as everyone else was talking, I had a couple just quick thoughts. One is, we say this on our website, but it bears repeating anytime the personal statement comes up again. as a reapplicant, do not submit the same personal statement. Even if it was the best personal statement that anybody has ever written ever in the history of the world, you should not submit the same thing, because you should have something new to add since your last application. So even if it was fantastic, we just, you know, you can use some of the same themes, you can use some of the same sentences, but just don't repeat the sort of the whole sentiment again. Just a quick thing.
Yeah.
And just another thing about repeating, because I just was pondering as Sarah and Jordan were talking, that along the sort of lines of that 5-paragraph essay, you want to make sure you're using different examples to support your motivation. So sometimes we read where people will repeat the same example in their experiences and then again in their secondary. So they had some really meaningful experience with a patient, which is wonderful, but you talk about it twice, and so it doesn't add anything. So again, just remember that, right, you're trying to build your case, and that they do read it all at the same time, the screeners and, you know, anybody who's looking at your application. So there's no, not really a benefit to using the same example more than once. And just sort of, yeah, wanted to throw that out.
Thank you. Those are really important points. Go ahead, Stella.
So to build upon what Sonia brought up about not using the same personal statement, there's a couple of reasons why we want to see a new statement. And the reason is because, you know, becoming a physician, you are entering a profession that, yes, it's service oriented, but it's also about lifelong learning. And so being able to, you know, write a new personal statement, being able to present new insights, new perspectives, new experiences, it shows that you are someone who's constantly trying to learn more about the communities that you want to serve, the patients that you want to work with, who you are, what, you know, learning more about the profession. It also demonstrates that you are flexible in regards to how you can communicate with other people. So it's also demonstrating, you know, your ability to, you know, either if your motivation is similar, you know, at least you can say it in different ways. And to also put it bluntly, I think it also shows that you're putting effort into trying to show the committee that you are, you know, putting forward a new application and that you have some, you know, new insights to share.
Yes, couldn't agree more. And those are very common, again, going back to what do we routinely give advice during our one-on-one feedback sessions for? I think we say that to every reapplicant. So that is something we say every time. Rewrite your personal statement, rethink about who you are. And I always put it in the terms of like, you are not the same person who applied to medical school a year ago. Things have happened. And particularly, I think in the past year, we are all different people than we were at this time a year ago. And so we want to know what that is about, what happened in that time. Sometimes people talk about being rejected from medical school. If we're talking to reapplicants, you know, sort of what did that do to and for you? And I will say some of the people who come back after they've been rejected reflect and say, you know what, that was probably the best thing that happened to me, because I really wasn't prepared and I didn't really know what I'm getting into. So it forced me to do some things and really reevaluate. And now I understand better and I really feel prepared. So great points, team. Thank you for that. And sorry for the technical difficulties. If we move forward,
sorry,
yes, Sarah.
I just wanted to point out too that feel free to take more time too. You don't have to apply the next year, and actually taking more time may mean you have more opportunities to do this kind of exploration of yourself and of medicine, and can be really valuable for reapplicants. So we want you to do some serious consideration about whether you want to apply directly for the following cycle. Always think about whether more time might give you more opportunity to learn and grow.
Absolutely. There is, you know, in your life, you know, sort of schedule, it may feel like there's pressure and you're on some sort of schedule and timeline. But again, sometimes your ability to feel prepared and have a deep enough understanding of what it is takes time, and you may need to just step away. So we do encourage people to reflect on that as well. So moving forward, a couple other pitfalls to review. The next one is not clearly articulating that you know what you're getting into and that you understand the role of a physician. And this is on a variety of levels. And so we don't expect you to know how to practice medicine when you arrive to medical school, but we do have an expectation that you will have an understanding of the profession of medicine, of the role of a physician. What are some of the rewards and challenges of medicine? What it goes hand in hand with how, sort of, if you have this motivation, to do something, and then you go explore and you say, I think this is what I want to do, but boy, I should probably, look under the hood and see, is this really, sort of going to feed my soul? Is it going to make me happy? Is it going to, sort of meet my professional goals? And so in order to do that, having some experiences where you work in the settings where you can observe physicians or work directly with physicians if that's available. And while you're there, being very intentional about gaining knowledge, not just, I think there's always this, and I was the same, right? There's the fascination with just the, what I call the blood and guts of medicine, right? The real technical aspects, the disease process or the injury process, and the fact that doctors can, make people feel better and sew up big gaping wounds and fix broken bones or remove, save people from, potentially life-threatening situations. And that is obviously the draw to medicine. Those things are really exciting, and that's where a lot of, sort of your motivation may come from. But boy, on the day-to-day, what does a doctor actually do? I don't spend the majority of my clinical time sewing people up or diagnosing MIs. I don't, sort of do those things. I do have interactions with people on a regular basis. I do build relationships. I do have frustrations with electronic health records and insurance companies and people dictating what I should and shouldn't be doing. I do love that I have patients that I've taken care of for nearly 20 years, that I've watched them, grow up into adults having their own children. So those are the kinds of things that are exciting and also frustrating about the practice of medicine that we hope that you'll be gaining in however you sort of have access to getting clinical exposure. But then you need to tell us about it. Also, what kind of other responsibilities and roles do doctors have? And where have you gotten that understanding? And some of it is really about, like, if you want to be a rural physician, what does that actually mean? Have you seen a rural doc? I live in Polson, Montana. If I go to the grocery store, the likelihood is I'm going to know about half the people in the grocery store. And so I have to be mindful of that. And sometimes they want me to look at their rash. And am I okay with that? Or do I want to live in the, urban setting of Seattle, where I can just be, more anonymous and go about my grocery shopping, without being bothered by somebody's rash. So those are the kinds of things. So if you say you want to be a rural doc, have you explored that? If you say you want to serve underserved populations, have you explored that? And what does that kind of doctor look like? If all of your time is spent with the neurosurgeon in a, for tertiary care setting, and then you tell us in your application how you can't wait to live in, sort of middle of nowhere, Wyoming, and be the only doc in town, it's going to be hard for us to sort of really get a sense that you know what you're getting yourself into. Also exploring why your experiences, attributes, those parts of you, your story, why does it fit being a physician rather than any other place where you can like science and help people? Because there are a lot of professions that do that. And sometimes that's what people come with, that's what they say. We want to know a little bit more about that and whether you've explored other areas. I'm going to toss it out to my colleagues to see if anybody has any other additional things that we usually tell people in feedback about the articulating that you know what you're getting into.
I've got some for the experiences that I definitely notice quite often, and is probably one of the bigger reasons why when reviewing applications, we might be like, nope, there's just not the depth. And it's totally about that understanding of medicine and how you're articulating that to us, especially in the experiences section, which is obviously just like such a huge chunk. It's the big place where we get to know kind of the things you've done and how those have impacted you, and right, kind of like we talk about the personal statement, that journey. it's okay to have, like, we want to hear patient experiences. We want to hear what you got out of something. We don't need a description. We know what AmeriCorps is. We know what scribing is. We know what research coordinators do. We've read all these applications. We know what people do because there's only a finite amount of opportunities to do certain things that kind of lead towards these goals, right? So what we're looking for is what you're getting out of it. And so when I'm reading applications, or when we're reading applications, or our committee is, when they're saying, oh, I scribed with this ER doctor and wow, I got to see them like amputate a knee, and like I got to, find out like that, oh wow, it's really busy. I need more, we need more than that. I want to know, like, did you perhaps not like the way the ER doctor interacted with that patient? Can you reflect on that? Why might that be? Was it, their frustration on both sides? Can you reflect on the experience and the context that it's in? Can you tell us whether or not you like the fast pace of that specialty, or that you're maybe interested in a slower specialty that you can, get to have those longitudinal relationships? Give us that insight, that meat, and it's okay for things not to always be bright and shiny. Like Dr. Muskie indicated, a lot of what we read oftentimes is sometimes a little too idealistic, right? It's the, oh, they save people and it's so wonderful, or it's way to the other side and you're coming in saying, oh, geez, none of this looks good, and so I'm going to be the difference. And that's okay, but we need to know that you see kind of both sides to things, and that, right, there is, saving people's lives, and there's also paperwork. And we just want to make sure that we understand that you understand that there is also paperwork. So when you're doing those experiences, you don't have a lot of space in those, which we totally understand, but that's part of it, right? Is sitting down and really working through how in 5 to 6 sentences, you let us know what you got out of scribing, or what you got out of being the shift lead at McDonald's, because those are valuable. And those are going to help us really ascertain kind of like, do you get it? And that not only do you get the physician thing, but all the things you've done that build up those pieces. So just remembering that, it's okay to say, okay, I maybe didn't like how this interaction went. Here's how I do it differently, or how I see this differently. That's okay. And obviously positives are good as well, but just a reiteration of, you need to dig sometimes to help us know that you understand what you're getting into.
Yeah, and if I could just add one more thing off of what Jordan said, it's all going back to that, like Sarah mentioned earlier, that like thesis statement of why this is important. So always just investigating with yourself why an experience helps to inform us why this role is right for you and why medical school is right for you. Just really getting into that nitty-gritty of why and how it helps, how your experiences help to build your desire to be a physician.
Yes, thanks, team. And I will also say that, also please know that what you write about what you think you want to do in the future, nobody's holding you to that. Like if you say like, I loved orthopedic surgery and I could see myself doing that. Well, if you get to medical school and you decide that, wow, it really isn't what, but if you're articulating why that is, exactly what Rebel just said, and you can help, what we're looking for is that you have the ability to sort of think in that way, to critically think about applying to medical school, seeking this out as a profession. We know your interest may change. We know you've not been exposed to every specialty that there ever was in medicine. So it may change. It may change in medical school. It may change in residency. Some people, it changes mid-career. They decide that they no longer want to do this, they want to do that. So you're not stuck to that, but we're looking for your ability to just sort of critically think through that and help us understand that you have explored this, at least you have some ideas about what you're getting into, and you can articulate to that. Anything else, team, before we move to the next slide?
Something that might help us transition to that next slide, and that is, so these questions that are on this slide are the starting point, right? So the follow-up questions that are going to help you do that digging deeper and that real reflection are the why questions, right? So, if you were writing this down, what frustrates physicians, you might write a list, right? And then the reflection piece is the why do these things, and how, and what have I learned from this, right? So you ask a good way to practice that reflection is to ask questions like these, and then ask more questions about what you've said. And that helps you dig deeper, right? It's just to keep asking more questions of yourself and thinking through this stuff. And that's part of that critical thinking that Dr. Muski is referring to.
Yes, thanks for that framing, Sarah. That's really helpful because this is where we want you to start to be able to answer these questions, but dig deeper. Sonia, did you have something to add?
Yeah, sorry to backtrack. I love Sarah's transition. But the one thing I just wanted to add is just thinking about a lot of the applications that I've read, and just to keep in mind for those of you listening that we give this advice to people. I have given this advice to people who have 10 hours of shadowing, and I have also given this exact same advice to somebody who's been a scribe for 5,000 hours. So and I think sometimes the people who have even more experience, you get it, and you just maybe don't convey that you get it. So don't assume when we're saying this, like, oh, well, I know, I've been a medical assistant for years. Just because you've done that doesn't mean that that comes through in the application. So just really keep that in mind. And that definitely applies to sort of the reflection piece that we'll talk about next too.
Great. So let's transition to our next, something is up with I cannot move the slide for some reason. There we go. All right, so what you might have noticed throughout our discussion today is that we keep coming back to this notion of reflection. Probably one of the main things that we hear, so that we see from when we look at applications, but also what we hear from our committee members when they're doing screenings, or even when a person has made it through and we're sort of doing a final evaluation. Some people will look and say, but gosh, I just don't understand, they just don't describe this very well. I don't know why this is important to somebody. So we lump all of that into this notion of reflection, and what I think the message here is that going back to preparing for medical school is not a checklist. It is a compilation of your experiences, attributes, your academic successes, all put into, sort of the story of you. And it's told through a reflective narrative, and that is your application. So what we find is that a lot of times people provide description or a summary of what they've done. They tell us what they did, but they don't tell us what it meant to them, or why was it important, or how does it contribute to your preparedness. So again, I think we've outlined some things here, and I'm looking forward to what my colleagues have to say in terms of framing some questions about how to approach reflection. Thinking about, why did you choose to do something? What was the intention? Were you really, just excited to shadow in the emergency department because you were looking for the blood and guts of it all? Or did you, think that that's outside of your comfort zone? Like, you're used to seeing sort of a slower paced internal medicine outpatient clinic, and you thought, gosh, I should put myself in the emergency department to get a different taste. Like, that's an important critical thinking process for us to be aware of. And then tell us, what did you learn? And that could be a variety of things, right? It may be about medicine in general, or healthcare system in the United States. Maybe you worked in a free clinic and you're seeing people who have very limited access. And what did that mean to you? How does that inform your decisions going forward about what kind of doctor you want to be, what kind of practice you want to have, how you want to be of service or of help? What did you learn about being a physician specifically? We talked a little bit about that earlier, right? Like, what are the frustrations? What are the rewards? What gives people satisfaction? Did you realize that lots of doctors, sort of spend some time in the hospital and some time in the clinic, or some doctors never step out of a hospital and some doctors never step into a hospital? Did you know all of that? And what does that mean for you as you think about your future? What did you learn about patients? This is one that we're often interested in, because this is the part where it's not about you anymore. And that's what medicine is. It's about service to other people and taking care of others, and whether that's individuals or communities or, sort of the larger population. So what did you learn about patients? What's the patient experience like? Did you work as a CNA, and did you see firsthand, were you in there on a daily basis, seeing the struggles of folks who lose their independence? What did that mean to you? Did you work in a different kind of setting, boutique sort of medicine practice, and what does that mean to those kinds of patients? And can you compare and contrast that from something else? What did you learn about the patient experience? And sometimes one of the most important things, what did you learn about yourself? Tell us, how did that make you feel? What did you learn? What did you learn about where your interests take you in medicine? I think somebody earlier said, did you observe something where you were just beside yourself because you thought, gosh, I had no idea that that's what I would never do that. That's not my personality. It's not my approach. Or did you resonate with something and think, gosh, someday I aspire to be that, and I need so much growth to get myself to be that way. So what did you learn about yourself? And then there is the category on your application, and this is sort of more the nuts and bolts of things, but you get to choose things that are the most meaningful for you, but you only get to choose 3. And so why are they the most meaningful? Is it because, I think sometimes people put the things that they spend the most amount of time on. So you have 5,000 hours of scribing or research. And so by default, that feels like it has to be the most meaningful. But if all you do in that most meaningful essay is just tell us what you did, and then I got to see this, sort of procedure, and then I got to see this, and I was so impressed with this, but you don't really reflect and tell us about it, that maybe isn't the most meaningful to you. It could have been the time you spent a month, sort of working with Habitat for Humanity or something like that, where it was totally not medically related, but you learned something about those categories that are listed above. So be intentional again about how you utilize your space on your application, and how you reflect and articulate your experiences. So I'm just going to pass it off to, I'm sure all of my colleagues have something to say about reflection, because it does tend to be one of those most common pitfalls for applicants. So anybody want to start?
Quick little thing that I think will be big, not only reflection to us is one of the most kind of paramount things you can have in your application, but also I think especially this year and next year, with the way the pandemic has changed access to opportunities to interact with patients or shadowing, some things may be virtual now, and you may have less hours than you had anticipated going, into applying in the next, cycle or two. Reflection is going to be what kind of makes up some of that space, right? You may not have gotten as many hours, you may not have gotten to be in the room. And so what our committee is going to be looking for is what you got out of that experience, even if it's, hundreds of less hours or even tens of less hours than you might have expected. Because that's Dr. Musi saying, it's the quality, right? It's the quality of what you're giving us, of what you're getting out of experiences, instead of just numbers, because a number doesn't tell us what you learned. And so I think, especially going forward, that may be one of the questions that we're kind of receiving in our office already is like, I wasn't able to do this, or I can't do this way, or I can't do as much of this. That's okay, because we know that there's going to be a little less access. And so the big thing to make up for that is just really digging into what did you get out of what you could get, and is that a part, and that should be a part of your journey, and trying to find the meaning within those and then reflecting that back out to us, I think will be kind of that big thing to kind of make sure that you're still giving, as much as you want into your application, even if you maybe missed out on some opportunities or they just shifted than what you were anticipating.
Shoot, I keep going mute. I'm recognizing that we are close to the end of our session, and I just want to throw out any last nuggets about reflection, because we're going to do summary here just in a minute, which also includes some things about reflection. Team, we're good? Perfect. And then I'm just having such trouble. There we go. So tools and takeaways. So our objective, of course, is to send you home or away from us today with, you're probably in your home, with tools and takeaways. So how do you improve your understanding and knowledge? So Jordan just touched upon one of the biggest questions that we're getting, right? So shadowing used to be something that was, strongly encouraged. We almost had an expectation of it. We recognize that in today's world, that is much less likely to occur. And so just know that we understand that you are not alone in that aspect. The majority of applicants who are newly applying within the past year have had their plans disrupted and or their ability to access that kind of experience has been disrupted. But I think what Jordan said is super critical in terms of whatever you can get, whether that's virtual, whether that's interviewing, whether that's reading, however you are able to get that, or working in a setting where perhaps you don't do direct shadowing, but you have some access. It's really about, sort of being intentional, absorbing that information, and then being able to reflect upon it. You certainly, look for other opportunities within clinical experience, whether that's paid or volunteer. Reading, like I said, podcasts are a great way. They're everywhere. Anybody ever is doing a podcast now, so you could pretty much spend your whole day listening to healthcare, medicine, and professional development type themed podcasts. So I think there is, but you do, you want to be a little bit selective, but there's much to learn there, including ones that are done, sort of by med students and or residents. It's a lot of wisdom to be found there. Staying up to date with current events, and then, as I've said before, be very intentional with your experiences. Make sure that you review your experiences. One of the ways to meet our request for being very reflective is to consider journaling during anything that's a new experience for you or something that you're doing with intentionality, because it's nice to be able to go back once you decide to write about it, to have written your thoughts at the time, because sometimes you kind of get a sense of what an experience meant to you. But if you're very intentional and journaling during the experience, sometimes you'll be able to be a bit more reflective. Ensuring that you got outside of your comfort zone, like I was saying, that is also sometimes the feedback that we get from our committee, that people seem like they're very nice people and well-intentioned, but they haven't stretched or grown someplace outside of their comfort zone. So if you can reflect on your own story and say, maybe I haven't been outside of my comfort zone, perhaps bullet number 2 is for you. How does any experience add to your story? So again, the intentionality of really, sort of working towards preparation and being ready for med school and to be a doctor. Have you reflected rather than described? And then be intentional to improve you, not your application. We don't want you to be working towards an application. We want you to be preparing yourself and tell the story of you. So with that, and in the interest of your time and ours, thank you very much for joining us today. We are always, like I said, available to answer any further questions. Hopefully, if you submitted questions, we were able to get to your question today. If not, please feel free to reach out to us at the email address at the bottom of the screen. The website is also listed there. Again, it's a wealth of information, and we really encourage you to explore that thoroughly when you're preparing to reapply. So thanks again for joining us, and take care, be safe.